the meal in that particular country, and that was 9,000 children would have been affected by this. They would miss 2 days worth of meals. And it was like, whoa, this is real. This isn't about creating fancy videos and putting out fancy marketing campaigns. This is real. This is about children having a meal. She said this is a lifestyle. And she's absolutely right. Like I hadn't thought about it in those terms. I've been in this sector for 20 odd years. I had not thought about it in those terms. It is a lifestyle.
So my guest in today's episode is Asim Lone, and he has been in the charity sector for over 20 years. He is currently, at the time of recording, the Deputy CEO of a charity called Charity Right, which was spearheaded by Shaykh Chowdhury. Hopefully, by the time this episode comes out, he will be the CEO of Charity Right, because that's what his career trajectory is over there. And in this episode, we talk about his insights in the charity sector. Obviously, if he's been there in 2 decades, he's got a lot to share. He's been both an employee of charities, he's run his own charity as well. And now soon, inshallah, he will be the CEO of Charity Right. So he has the breadth and the width of the entire Muslim charity sector in the UK. And he came today on this episode to share that with us. And I hope you benefit from it. This has been happening over the last several years anyway. But I think this Ramadan especially, this question of sincerity in the charity sector, and are the people that are working in the charity sector, are they sincere? Do they have a fear of God? Do they have a fear of Allah? And what is it that what they're doing? Is what they're doing ethical? This question has become a lot more paramount now, right? And especially because of the stories that you've always told me, I've always had a certain paranoia in my mind that maybe there's problems in this sector, and it's not just in the UK; it's around the globe as well, right? But you're saying the people that are working there, as in the employees, the actual volunteers and the employees, there's no issue of sincerity there that you've ever seen.
Absolutely. There's no issue at all. Look, people exist on a spectrum, right? People's motivations exist on a spectrum. People's incentives exist on a spectrum. And, to say that everybody is in the same place, occupies the same place in the spectrum would be unrealistic. But I absolutely, that spectrum is, about impact and impact driven and cause driven, right? Everybody that I come across, whether that's in the organization that I work for, or have worked for, or people from other organizations, I've never come across anybody that's ever given me the sense that they're here for the wrong reasons. Like I said to you, in the 20 years that I've been connected to this sector, I've only ever directly come across one case of fraud. He was caught and he was prosecuted.
But are you saying that this is only in the UK, or even because you've done a lot of missions globally as well? And I know you've been to like Kashmir, and you've been to Turkey, was it?
Yeah, I've been to Philippines as well.
And you're going, like, aren't you going to Sudan soon?
Not Sudan, not anymore, because of the troubles there. But I'm going to go to Ethiopia. So Ethiopia and Turkey, inshallah, will be flying out this Sunday, inshallah.
You've seen the sincerity of the people that are working in the charity sector here in the UK, but also even globally.
So globally, there does tend to be more issues.
Okay.
Right.
But the UK has been pretty good.
UK is very good. Globally, there does tend to be issues, and you've got to be very careful about who you're working with in terms of implementing partners.
Okay.
Ideally, so our preference and ideal for us is to set up our own offices and have our own employees, vet them, etc. They then operate according to our standard operating procedures, our policies, etc. And it just means that we can guarantee a better delivery mechanism. We can guarantee better reporting, better monitoring, kind of all of that sort of stuff, right? So that's our preference. You can't always do that. It really depends on
logistics.
Yeah, I mean the first point really from our point of view is how much money are you spending in that particular country. So if you're spending a sizable amount of money, it's actually it makes more financial sense for you to set up your own operation.
Right. Okay.
Right? Because when you're working with an implementing partner, they tend to work on an admin kind of percentage, which then obviously grows as you spend more money with them. Right? And so it kind of makes more sense if you get to a certain size of project that you're setting up your own operation.
Right. Okay.
So at Charity Right, for example, we have our own operation in Pakistan, in Bangladesh, in Turkey, in Sudan, where although we've got the troubles now in Sudan, but we're working towards establishing our own office in Sudan as well, inshallah. So that's kind of like the ideal, the gold standard. So if you look at the likes of the bigger charities, their network in the field is made up of their own people, essentially, and that's how you then.
Where does Charity Right come on kind of the spectrum of the largest or the smallest? Is like somewhere in the middle.
Oh, we're tiny.
Oh, okay.
Oh, we're tiny. Okay. Our income last year was 2.5 million.
Oh, so that is small then.
Yeah. We're tiny.
But you're okay, because I really want to get to the meat of like your journey in all of this, right? Because you were in the charity sector, you got bit by the bug, and then but there were things that happened that were so bad that you just decided, I've had enough of this sector, because I've had enough of this Muslim charity space. And when I've been listening to things that you've been saying to me when we've just met, for dinner, or we've been speaking on the phone, I've always kind of felt like it was the lack of sincerity in the sector, but you're saying it's not the lack of sincerity in the sector. So what was it? What was it that kind of just drove you away? Because you left the Muslim charity sector, didn't you?
I did. Yeah. So for the last 4 years, I was working for a mainstream charity.
Yeah.
Came out
a non-Muslim charity.
Non-Muslim charity, yeah. Absolutely.
And what drove you away?
So, well, actually, in that particular instance, I was made redundant, and so.
But you just chose not to go back as well.
But I chose not to go back. Yeah, I did choose not to go back. So okay. So essentially, what you've got in the Muslim sector, by and large, it's changing, but by and large, you have founder CEOs that are running these charities across the sector.
Right, and you've mentioned this thing called founder syndrome.
Founder syndrome, absolutely, okay. Right.
So when
you have a founder, and I don't think it's peculiar to the charity sector. I think it's just generally a phenomenon that is centered around founders of any organization. But when you have a founder,
like startups,
exactly.
Which is why you and I were able to relate so much, because I was seeing this in startups as well.
Absolutely, and so when you have a founder, there is a mindset that's adopted predominantly by founders. I guess it can happen with anybody, but predominantly by founders, where they get to a point in their journey with that organization where they believe with sincerity that if they are not there, and if they do not have control over that organization, that organization will fail.
Okay, so basically, like, I have to oversee all of the marketing, and I have to oversee all of the operations, and I have to oversee all of the implementation, and I'm going to make sure all the staff are okay, and basically I need to micromanage everything, because this entire thing has to be carried on my shoulders because I am this organization. That's basically founder syndrome, right?
Absolutely. And I would take it even a step further. Like, I've worked in some organizations where every single decision could only be made by the CEO.
Right. And what is the problem with that? What is the problem with founder syndrome? What does it do to the organization?
So it really stifles the team, right? It really, really stifles the team, because then you've now got an organization. Doesn't matter how many people are in that organization, let's say 20, 30, 40, 50, but you've now got an organization that is being run by the ideas of one person. And that, to me,
also by their time and energy, effectively.
By their time and energy as well.
Which
by
is
their
limited.
Decision making, by their experience, by their capability, by their competency. And that just is counterproductive, because why then do you have a team of 20 people,
You might as well do everything yourself.
when you are literally, kind of stifling their capability. You have a team of 20 people. Let's stay with the 20 example. You got a team of 20 people. Each person comes with their set of capabilities and experience and expertise and creativity and innovation and ideas and all of that good stuff, right? But that isn't getting used. Instead, it's all being centered in this one individual.
Yeah.
And that's a problem, because it then stifles the team. And so now, if you've got if you've got people on your team who are driven by impact, like I said to you, that everyone is driven by impact, and you've got somebody who's driven by impact, who's come from the corporate sector, come from a corporate background, has come with a very clear objective that this isn't, for me, no longer about making money, but this is about using my skills to drive impact, and that individual is stifled, then it becomes too much.
So do you experience this? Because if you've got the founder who's doing all of this, right, and even if they're doing it with all manner of sincerity, if you're not able to put your heart or your soul into it, because it has to be the founder's heart and soul that goes into whatever it is that you're doing, what does that do for your morale? Because it's going to create burnout, right? And that's what it did to you. It basically created burnout.
Absolutely. It creates burnout. It creates disenfranchisement. It creates...
How does that make you feel, or anybody else who's working in that charity sector, who's working under somebody that's like this? How does it make them feel?
I mean, that's very complex, right? I mean, I think it's...
but if you could encapsulate it into just a...
If I was to encapsulate the feeling ultimately is, I'm wasting my time here. I'm not driving the impact that I've come here to drive, right? And
that's what leads to the burnout as well, doesn't it? Because you keep punching and punching and punching to try and make impact, and you're not able to make it.
Yeah, it leads to frustration. Frustration then leads to burnout. You're trying this way, that way, whatever, and then ultimately, you come to a point of either it breaks your health, or it breaks your spirit.
And what did it do for you? Did it do both of those for you? It did affect your health, didn't it?
It did affect my health. There have been some points where it affected my health. But I mean, when I left the sector, at that point, I was done. It was about more spirit than anything else. And I just thought, okay, I'm just not the right fit for this sector. I'm just somebody who is I'm always going to come up against this thing. And so this is just no longer the right fit for me.
And it's not just the charity sector. Because the reason why you and I had a lot of these conversations, because I've not worked in the charity sector, but I've worked for a hell of a lot of non-profits, and it's all the same thing over and over. I was coming up against all of the same stuff, and especially if you're doing a full-time job, and then in the evenings you're volunteering your time to this, and you're already tired from your full-time job, and at that time I didn't have kids and stuff, but obviously you've got to run your daily life and things as well. And then you're giving what would be ordinarily your leisure time to this because you want to make impact. And then you're coming up against this wall, which is making you feel frustrated. You're trying to punch through it and you can't, because the founder is actually in the way. Despite his or her sincerity, they're in the way. It just creates burnout. You're just like, I can't deal with this. It's just the only difference that I noticed, I would say the difference between me and you and everybody else was, I think we were prepared to accept to ourselves that okay, it's okay for us to say, okay, we're not going to take part in this because this isn't working. Whereas everybody else wasn't able to have that conversation with themselves to say, because of the guilt, I can't leave because that would be wrong. This is a question of my iman. If I leave this charity, if I leave this non-profit that I've signed up for, it's like I'm leaving the battlefield or something. There's a lot of that.
Definitely. There is it's very, very complex, and this is what I said to you. It's people that work in the charity sector. Their intentions exist on a spectrum, right? And for some, it is absolutely about their integrity. If I'm leaving this sector, then what was this all for? Why did I enter into this sector? Then I'm a failure. Exactly. And that's very, very
I'm
real
a coward
even.
You kind of feel like, okay, well, then that makes me a coward if I walk away. But every time that I've actually walked away from the non-profit, it has been the right decision. even though it was met with a lot of stay, don't go kind of thing. It was just met with kind of like a sense of abandonment by the others, right? But it wasn't. I mean, I didn't get like any aggro over it. It was just, why would you want to leave? But then I've seen those people leave as well eventually, but it's just taken them a lot longer to get to that conclusion.
Yeah.
And you must have seen the same thing, that you've seen other people leave wherever you were, other people left as well. It's just that maybe you got to that conclusion a lot quicker.
Yeah, definitely, absolutely. And it's really interesting because, there's many people that I'm still in touch with, that I've worked with in the past, that I've decided to move on from that particular.
And some of those have gone back to corporate jobs, right?
They've either gone back to corporate jobs, or they've gone to work in mainstream charities, for example.
Right, okay.
Without exception, they still look back at the Muslim sector in favorable terms.
Oh, that's good.
Because there is a spirit that we have in the Muslim sector that is very rare. I've not seen that. Certainly in the last 4 years that I was in the mainstream.
So the actual work that we did, whatever we were able to produce, I do look back on that favorably. Yes, okay, I do look back on that favorably. I feel like, okay, the frustration, the wall that we came up against is because of the founder syndrome and all those kind of things. I don't look back on that favorably, but if I think about the bonding that happened between me and the other people that were in the non-profit, or the affinity that I have for them, there is a bond that's there. There's this certain admiration and affection. There's a certain affinity that we have for each other that I haven't actually experienced anywhere else.
Yeah.
Because we're not mates, as in we didn't go to the cinema together, we didn't go on holiday together, and these people didn't necessarily come round to my house for dinner. I went to their house. They don't know my wife and kid, and I don't know their wife and kid necessarily. But there was something there. Even now, when I speak to these people, there's a brother that actually helped me set the studio up, as in he just gave me advice over the phone. And even now, when I speak to him over the phone, there's a love there. There's a certain rahmah between the both of us. We don't even discuss what came before us, but there's something there.
Because the foundation of that relationship
Because of the foundation of that relationship. There's a certain affection that we have for each other that was set up because of the work that we did together in this non-profit. And he was actually not in the non-profit for that long even. He was only in there for a very short space of time. I was in a lot longer, but his contribution was important. And so I'll call him and say, okay, I'm thinking of doing this, or, what mic should I get, or whatever. Just gives me his feedback and we carry on.
I think there's something in the tradition that, you only truly know somebody once you travel with them and you work with them, right? And I think this is what we're really alluding to.
Yeah, because the thing is, like the guy that you work with at work, he's there for the pay packet, right? But the guy that you work with in the non-profit, he's not there for the pay packet, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
I miss them all now.
But yeah, no, and so it's so like I say, they do look back at that time favorably, and they're still. In fact, I was talking to somebody recently, and she spent quite a few years outside of the Muslim sector, quite a number of years actually. She spent, I would say, maybe about 6 or 7 years. She spent maybe a little bit longer than that, and she's just recently come back about a year ago. She came back into the Muslim sector. Because the
pulls you back in.
The pull is strong. It's a strong pull, right? So yeah, no, it's so there is definitely something beautiful about that. Because and I think part of it also is it's aligned with our tradition, right? If you are inclined in that way,
which everybody is.
Most people are, right?
Yeah.
Most people are. If you're inclined in that way, then there is a magnetism, right? There is something, dare I say, utopic about that.
Yeah. I think now, like even a lot of the friends that my wife has made, a lot of those friends she's made is because they did something together at a charity or at a non-profit. Right. And even she's come up against the same things where it's she's come up against the wall of the founder syndrome. And I've kind of been able to bring some outside perspective and kind of pointed it out. And then she's kind of noticed it herself. And then she's been part of other non-profits. and there's been those kind of issues. But after she's left those non-profits, the friends are still there, and she has a very good relationship with them.
So by the way, on the founder syndrome, right? So now I'm on this side, right, of the desk. Essentially, I am now running a charity, right? I run charity, right? And I totally get founder syndrome now.
Yeah.
Like I totally
Because you feel
understand
the pressure of it.
Right.
Yeah.
I totally get how somebody can fall into that trap, let's call it.
Because the founder has his own guilt, right?
Right.
He has his own guilt. His guilt is, if this fails, it's all on me.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So he's imprisoned by his own guilt.
And it's so easy to carry. So like we have charity, right? We feed approximately 30,000 children, right? And we provide them with a daily meal. So in the vast majority of the cases of those children, that will be the only meal that they will have that day. So there's a certain responsibility that comes with that. Okay. So I'll give something happened recently where we have an internal mechanism where funds have to be released on a monthly basis. That got delayed, and there was a risk that the meal in that particular country, and that was 9,000 children would have been affected by this. They would miss 2 days worth of meals, and it was like, whoa, this is real. Like this isn't about creating fancy videos and putting out fancy marketing campaigns. This is real. This is about children having a meal.
And so for the founder, they can't sleep at night, right?
Right. So now you're carrying that, right? You're carrying that. But then also, I think for the guy that's at the top, you're also carrying the livelihoods of your team, right? Like we've just come through Ramadan. Alhamdulillah, we've managed to hit our target in Ramadan. Alhamdulillah. But at the moment where we are in our journey, Ramadan represents 80% of our income for the year. So in other words, we have a good Ramadan, we have a good year. And if we don't, we don't, right? So our two biggest costs are what? The meals and the salaries, right? So those are the two things that are always on my mind, and I'm sure that's the case for every single leader across the sector.
You've had the experience of running your own Muslim charity, a small one. You've worked for a number of other charities in the charity sector as well. So you've had a good layer, cross section, good lay of the land. You've then got disenchanted, left the charity sector, the Muslim charity sector, and gone mainstream. And then now you've come back. What was it like at the mainstream? When you were at the mainstream charity sector, because from what I know of you, you were actually quite a lot happier there.
Yeah. So.
And what was driving that?
So the charity that I worked at was a UK-based charity. All of their work is in the UK. So the impact is very, very different. The deliverables are very, very different. Up until that point, I had done all of my experience was in international development, right? Child poverty primarily, with some emergency relief. And now I'm kind of going from that to I'm working with an older demographic that is affected by isolation and loneliness. Very, very different cause.
Completely different remit.
Right? So that took some time getting used to. But I could get behind it. I could get behind it. I could see the very real impact, not just their mental health, but their physical health as well. It was manifesting. So, I could get behind it, and that was absolutely fine. So the happiness was on a number of different levels, right? This is a charity that was run, they were very, very organized. They were run in a way that was not unlike a corporate.
Yeah. But they didn't have the founder syndrome going on, right?
They didn't have the founder syndrome. They had a very interesting structure in place. And the way that they were doing their programs, delivering their programs was very interesting as well. So they are delivering programs in a very sustainable way. And what that means is their programs, The vast majority of their programs are cost neutral. Okay, so what that means is they actually position their programs in a way where the programs themselves generate funds. So to access the program, the beneficiary, the person that's benefiting from the program, um, in some cases is paying a small fee to access that particular service, or there is a pot of funds either from the government or something that essentially means that program is cost neutral. And so when COVID hit, so I was there during COVID, during lockdown, when COVID hit, yes, their income was very severely affected because they weren't able to go out and do fundraising in the traditional way, and etc. They had an investment portfolio that was very negatively impacted. Like their investment portfolio, I think, is worth 30 million or something, and it just plummeted. Right? They had, they've got trading subsidiaries that were affected, and so on and so forth. But despite their income being affected, their programs weren't affected. The programs continue to operate as normal. There were some tweaks that were made, but the programs continue to operate as normal. Why? Because they were sustainable in the first place. The learning from that as an experience and the way that they've structured their organization, structured their programs, structured their income stream, that was just a real eye-opener.
Okay.
Like up until that point, I was thinking along a very different line. And so that learning was a source of happiness. And then there's little things like, work-life balance and kind of that sort of stuff. They are very, very big on work-life balance, to the point where if anybody's sending an email late into the evening, they have to explain why they sent that email late into the evening.
Because at the Muslim charity sector, they could guilt you into working on a Saturday afternoon, right?
There's some element of that. I mean, when it comes to Ramadan, for example, there is no work-life balance.
Yeah.
Because you're talking about...
But that again creates burnout, right? That's another problem.
It is a problem. Yeah, absolutely. So if you're an organization like Charity Right, for example, is an organization that is highly reliant on Ramadan, then every hour of Ramadan is an opportunity that must not be missed.
But it's not sustainable. Like the thing that I found, the non-profits that I worked with, was, I know you use this term founder syndrome, but one of the terms that I kind of came up with at that point was battlefield syndrome. That you're always on, you're always in battle mode all the time, but you can't be in battle mode all the time. It's not sustainable. The body can't take it. You can't be right. Well, we're going to work till 2:00 in the morning on this particular thing, and then tomorrow we're also going to work till 2:00 in the morning, and we're just going to keep on going every single day for the next 2 years. It just doesn't work.
No, it doesn't work.
But it does exist. And in all of the organizations, the activist organizations, they have a lot of battle syndrome in there, and that has its own issues.
Yeah, and I think that's a two-way street. I think remember, look, go back to who is working in these organizations. Forget the leaders. Who is working in these organizations? People that are driven by impact. People that there was something that was very. We interviewed somebody recently. She came up with a word that really took me by surprise, but I think is very apt. She said, this is a lifestyle.
Yeah.
And she's absolutely right. Like I hadn't thought about it in those terms. I've been in this sector for 20 odd years. I had not thought about it in those terms. It is a lifestyle. People that come to work in this sector choose to do so because that's the lifestyle that they've adopted. And so you've got that. And so they want to have impact. They want to, activism, or whatever that impact is for them, whatever cause is important for them. For some it's activism, for some it's something else. And remember, leaders of those organizations are also coming from this group of people, right? So you've got this kind of two-way street, which is positive because you see so much that's achieved, but the downside of it is absolutely burnout. Is absolutely people's health.
And the problem with the burnout is that then you're productive for a month or 2 months or a year or 2 years, and then because of the burnout, it's kind of the tortoise and the hare kind of thing. Like if you were just to take a tortoise kind of approach, you'd actually get to the end goal a lot better than the hare, because the hare is just kind of doing this fast zipping up and down, And my biggest issue when I was working with the non-profits was it was a very just acting like a hare rather than and I was being accused of being a tortoise. That's what I was accused of, but I was like, but this is a lot more sustainable. It's not a, because the problem is the guilt. Well, you're not working hard enough, you're not working long enough. But no, if I take the time for the rest, the recuperation and the reflection, and Allah is always telling us to reflect. If I take the time, I have to have the rest first. The rest then leads to the recuperation. The recuperation then leads to the reflection. And the reflection, in the reflection, there is wisdom.
Yep.
But if you don't even get to the rest, you don't get to the recuperation, you're not going to get to the reflection, you're therefore not going to get to the wisdom. And I was constant, and without being self-aggrandizing, I was always being turned to, how have you figured out how to do this? But how have you been more strategic about this? I remember, I'll just give you a really small example, right? Really basic example. I was working with a non-profit. I had to put a basic website together. And I think I put the website together in about 30 minutes.
Did you use WordPress?
I did not use WordPress.
Can we just end the interview right here?
We can end the interview right now if you want. I did not use WordPress. And I put the website together in about, I would say maybe 30 minutes, 45 minutes, just a really basic website, right? They were talking about that website for a year. Everybody was banging on about this website. It was such a beautiful website. And then people were asking me, can you do websites for us? Can you? I'm like, I'm not a website designer, but you did this website. Look, I'm not a website designer. I did it because I was tasked to do that as part of working with this non-profit, right? Did that in my spare time. But people were constantly asking me, how did you, if you're not a website designer and you don't do websites all day long and you don't do all these kind of things, how were you able to make such a nice website? And I said, well, I just use this tool. You'd be like, how did you even figure out what tool you should use? And the reality is, because I took a step back without just being all kind of, a hamster on a wheel, took a step back, just took the moment and was like, okay, why don't we just try this tool and let's just, and actually thought about what do we actually need? We just need one page with a few elements. I don't need to create this 50-page brochure website that does all these 1,000 things. And genuinely, when we talk about impact, that website had huge impact. And it still gets spoken about even now. But like I said, that came from rest and recuperation.
Yeah,
you can't achieve that without rest and recuperation.
No.
It can't be done.
No, I think there is another thing though here as well though, which is that I think some people are more strategic than others. Some people, I think it comes naturally, that kind of the strategic thinking, the bigger thinking. Some people are ideas people, some people are doers, right? We all have different functions. We all have different gifts, right? And so, some of that is definitely part of this as well. It's very easy. Like I have 2 children, as you know. The contrast between them and their personalities and their characteristics are wonderful, because one is absolutely more about strategy and doing the absolute minimum that he can get away with, right? And the other is about, working really hard.
No, but the strategy works for him, doesn't it?
It does.
I mean, he's been very impressive.
Yeah. Absolutely.
I wish I had that level of strategy at that age. He's been very impressive.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Whereas my daughter, and this is not to belittle her or anything like that.
I wouldn't show her this video.
This is not to belittle or anything like that. She I think this is a strength of hers, where she is absolutely about putting in the graft.
Yeah, putting in the hours.
Yeah, putting in the hours, right? That's what she absolutely believes and lives by. So I think there is that element as well in what you're talking about in the scenarios that you're describing.
I'm talking more. What I'm referring really more to is the hamster on the wheel. When you're on the wheel and you're just trying to survive, just trying to breathe, because you've put yourself into that battle mode. You haven't got you haven't got the time to think. Therefore, you don't have the ability to think.
Yeah.
And you cannot bring wisdom into the work that you're doing. And we do need the wisdom.
Yeah.
Because we're told, approach to them with the wisdom. You need to be able to always have wisdom in the work that you're doing.
Absolutely.
My gripe was always the wisdom's missing.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Which I know is your gripe. You're just too polite to say, but that is your gripe.
I am in the Muslim charity sector.
I have to be careful about what I say.
The last thing that I need, right, is emails, and be flooded with emails.
Brother, we're really
calls.
disappointed in your behavior. Your lack of other, brother. We're really disappointed in how you choose to conduct yourself. You have a moral responsibility, brother.
Absolutely. Absolutely. No, but like I said, I think the strategy aspect of it is important. Not everybody is strategic. Not everybody has that as a mindset, and so I think one of the jobs of a leader is to understand, and this is encapsulated in the prophetic tradition beautifully, right? Is to understand what people's capabilities are and use them accordingly, right? And put them in the roles accordingly. And so
But it becomes too much of a mishmash. That's the problem. It's just like we're all just gonna row. All of us are just gonna row, even though some guy might be better at being a co-pilot or a navigator, or everybody's just gonna row as hard as we can.
Yeah. Well, that's a failure in leadership.
That's a failure in leadership. Yeah, that's what I'm getting to.
Yeah.
Okay, you went to the mainstream sector. What has brought you back in now? And now, obviously, can we talk about the charity you're working for now?
Yeah, of course you can. Yeah.
Okay, so were you missing the Muslim charity sector, or you got an offer and came back?
Yeah. So that magnetism, I was feeling the pull.
Okay, and how long had you been away?
4 years.
Okay, so and when did you start feeling it? Probably the last year or so.
Probably the last a couple of years.
Okay, so you started feeling it, but you kind of ignored it.
Yeah, I entered into some conversations. They didn't quite pan out. It was just a little bit more of the same. It just kind of brought up a few red flags.
Yeah.
Triggered a few traumas, that kind of thing, right? They didn't quite pan out, and then this came along, and it was really interesting actually how it came along. But this came along, recruiter that I had spoken to previously, and he reached out, put it on my desk, as it were, and it was just a really interesting conversation that I had with this recruiter, probably 18 months previous or something. And so he reached out and said, look, I think this is right for you. What do you think? It was the deputy CEO position with a view of taking over the CEO.
So you're in deputy CEO position at charity right now, right?
Yeah, so I'm about to take over as CEO.
Oh, are you?
Yeah. So, in fact, I am technically the CEO now.
Really?
Yeah. Mashallah, yeah.
I'm speaking to the CEO of a charity.
You are speaking to the CEO of a charity.
Does that come with any benefits, of any kind for me in any way?
I don't have a ring. You can maybe kiss my ring or something if that's what I don't know. But no, so yeah, I will be taking over as CEO. So Sajjad.
And how are you feeling about that?
Excited.
Okay. And how are you going to prevent founder syndrome now that we've been talking about that?
I've got a really good board behind me.
Okay.
I've got a really good senior leadership team. They will absolutely give me the slaps that I need to wake me up out of founder syndrome.
Okay. But that's the reason why you were willing to come back, right? Because they didn't demonstrate those red flags, isn't it? They didn't have the founder syndrome going on.
The first conversation that I had, I was very reticent, and he said, look, have a conversation, see how it goes.
Okay.
And like I said to you can, after years and years of experiencing the same things, experiencing the same behaviors, experiencing the same, witnessing the same, observing the same characteristics, you develop a nose for what's what, right? And from the first conversation, it was like, there's something different about these guys.
Okay.
And that's continued. I've been here now for 6 months.
You felt like there were more on it.
Yeah, absolutely.
And do you think that's because the people that are behind the charity? Can we talk about the Shaykh that's involved with the charity?
Yeah, so Shaykh Tawfique Chowdhury is...
Because he's always had that, hasn't he? He's always had that kind of... He's always been very strategic, and that's been part of the DNA of all the organizations that he set up.
Absolutely. So Shaykh Tawfique founded the charity. So he founded Mercy Mission.
Yeah.
Ran Mercy Mission. I think Mercy Mission has been running now for the last 20 odd years. And Mercy Mission actually was one of the organizations that we spoke to 20 years ago to take that small charity. It was really interesting.
And did they take it?
They didn't. They didn't. Gave it to somebody else.
We'll have to have a words with the Shaykh.
And actually, I've got a really interesting... I share this all the time. I'll share this with you as well. I've got a really interesting anecdote about Shaykh Tawfique. I'll come back to that in a bit. So Shaykh Tawfique founded the charity through Mercy Mission. So Mercy Mission essentially is an incubating organization. Starts projects, grows them. Once they hit like a certain critical mass, they get spun out into their own organizations, completely independent organizations with independent boards, independent management teams that have nothing to do with Mercy Mission. So, I mean, it's really, really interesting that they do that, right? Like, go back to the founder syndrome. You have some organizations that have been run 30 years down the line by still the same founder, right? Because they're unable to let go. And whereas you have this as a contrast,
It's more corporatized.
it's the contrast here is, let's put it out in the world as soon as we can possibly can, and let somebody come along, somebody who knows what they're doing, and they can take it forward. So there's a number of projects that have been started this way and now spun out into their own organizations. Charity Right is one of them. National Zakat Foundation is another.
Yeah, National Zakat Foundation. I met the then CEO, and I was very impressed with the way that was being run. Then we had good conversations about how they were approaching things, and it was very impressive.
Yeah, absolutely. Al Gawthar is another organization that's come out of the Mercy Mission stable.
Yeah.
And there's other things that they've started that haven't quite worked. So they're not everything's a success. So Ramadan TV was a channel that they started. It didn't quite pan out. They've tried publications, magazines, for example. They've tried and other charities as well. So there was like a fostering charity that they tried. It didn't quite work out. So, but you've got to try, right? You've got to try, and you've got to kind of see what.
But the DNA is there, isn't it? The DNA is that we've got to make this thing kind of run on its own, and it's everything that he sets up. He kind of imprints that DNA into each organization that he sets up. The kind of people he brings in, he makes sure they don't have those kind of things about them, isn't it? That's what is really making.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the whole, like, the machine, the way that it's been kind of pieced together is actually quite beautiful, because you essentially you've got a group of individuals that are graduating through the Al Gawthar experience. That's where they're getting their tarbiyah, right? And Al Gawthar is being run by Shaykh Tawfique and his colleagues from that ilk. These are the people that are graduating and becoming then the volunteers who are starting these projects, and really kind of establishing that DNA, the foundational DNA in these projects that then gets kind of bears fruit when they become organizations, right? And so there's a real ethos, there's a real culture that has emanated from that. And so although Sheikh Tawfique has no legal control, from a governance point of view, from a legality point of view, his name is nowhere, right? In any of these organizations, but we recognize the stables that we've come from. We recognize the family, the network that we're a part of, right?
It's almost like a guild.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so, and it's wonderful. I had the privilege of, so we have a summit that we do internally for all the network, and that was last October, so once a year. And so I got offered the job in August, I think it was, and I had or maybe September, and I had a November start because I was on a 3-month notice period in my last place, and then so they invited me to this summit. So I turned up to this summit. There's 100 people in this room, leaders from each of the different organizations that make up Mercy Mission, and all the international kind of chapters of those organizations as well. So Charity Right, as I mentioned, we have international chapters, National Zakat Foundation, international chapters, Mercy Mission International, the same with Al Gawthar as well. You got all of these leaders from all of these different organizations in this room. And the two things that struck me, the sincerity and the capability.
But sincerity is also in like the way they conduct themselves around you, isn't it? Like almost like the body language, the other kind of the sincerity comes through the adab and the body language. You notice things. There's none of these like little microaggressions, these kind of funny little quips and all that. It kind of tells you.
You hear it in the language. You see it in the body language as well. It's yeah. I mean,
there's a certain seriousness
really
there without being like overly kind of bland and overly kind of miserable. It's not melancholy or anything like that. But it comes through, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And you know, I was there for 2 days, and I was inspired by the conversations that I had. I was uplifted by the conversations that I had. I was informed, educated by the conversations that I had. You know, there was so much experience, so much knowledge, so much wisdom in that room. Knowledge from an Islamic point of view, but also from a professional point of view as well.
So tell me this anecdote.
You're right. So Shaykh Tawfique, yeah. So before I come to the anecdote, just one last thing on Shaykh Tawfique. So I had the privilege to meet Shaykh Tawfique recently. He was in the country in March, and so he kind of shared with me. Obviously, I was introduced as the new CEO in waiting, and we had a really good conversation. And one of the things that he said to me was the founding kind of principles, if you like, of Charity Right, where he said, look, this for me was always about impact, has always been about impact. You know, it's, you know, how many birds can you kill? And these were his words. How many birds can you kill with that one stone, right? And so, yeah, fine. You can go out and you can raise £100 million. Fine, right? But is your impact worth £100 million?
Because you've got a charity that's worth 2 million, but has an impact of 100 million.
Exactly.
It's very different to a charity that's doing 80 million revenue and has an impact of half of that.
Absolutely. And so at Charity Right, we focus on, and this is not a shameless plug, but I just want to kind of just prove the point. At Charity Right, we focus on the school meal. Now, why do we focus on the school meal? Like, it seems so insignificant to focus on the school meal, but the school meal it solves the malnutrition bit. That for many children will be the only meal that they will have that day, and it will be a meal that has, you know, the right balance of all the nutrients that they need to sustain themselves for that day. So it's solving the malnutrition. It's solving. It's keeping them in school. They're coming to school because of that school meal, right? And so it's keeping them in school. And we know all the statistics from the UN, etc., show that the longer the child stays in school, that for every single year of education that they have, it exponentially increases their chances of, you know, getting a job and working their way out of poverty, and breaking that cycle of poverty. It solves the child labor thing. They don't have to go out and do work to put food on the table.
It's one heuristic, isn't it? It's one metric. You solve that one metric and it solves 5 other problems.
Exactly. It's that one stone that kills all of these different birds, right? And that's what he means by impact. You find we're a £2.5 million charity, but the impact that we're having is 5 times, 6 times, 7 times the amount.
So imagine if it was a charity that was doing 20 million or 50 million.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
It'd be $1 billion impact.
Absolutely. So for us, I've just little things like to access the school meal, we have a hygiene program. So we teach the kids to wash their hands. Now that sounds really simple, but if they're not washing their hands, how are they going to benefit from the meal? Right? We teach the schools. We set up a kitchen for them, and we teach them how to, we teach them how to use washing up liquid, right? Because they will not know how to do that. All right. Why? Because if they're cooking the meals and they're preparing the meals without that, how are the children going to benefit from those meals? And so there's a number of different things. The child marriage. Where you have girls, and they become a burden, they can't go out to work or whatever. What do families do in these countries? They marry them off, right? And so we're solving the child marriage problem. Slavery into debt. So the father indebts himself into slavery, right? Because there's no work or whatever, he borrows money or borrows, credit or whatever, to the point where he's indebted now. The mother, doesn't have to sell her body and all of this sort of stuff, right? So these are all very, very real challenges in the countries that we work in the communities that we work in, right? That are being faced, and these are forgotten communities in many ways, right? Because they're not affected by emergencies. They've not been affected by an earthquake or by a conflict, or actually Sudan at the moment is obviously experiencing this conflict. But most of the countries that we work in are not affected by those sorts of phenomenon. And so in many ways, they are forgotten communities. And so that's why for us, it's even more important that we stay in those communities long term, and we help to kind of develop those communities. So we don't do things like emergencies or emergency responses. It's something that we're thinking about, and how we can align that to our longer term objectives. For us, it's not about the short term. It's not about, hey, just take your money and just
Emergency aid.
and just provide a food pack. It's a longer term engagement for us, because that's how you're going to drive impact. The food pack that you provide to a family is going to last for a month. What do they do after that?
Feed a man for a day. It literally is feed a man for
Absolutely,
a day. Yeah.
absolutely. And actually, by doing so, you create a dependency on yourself. And where I strongly believe that as charities, our mission should be to put ourselves out of business.
Yeah.
Right? We should not need to exist.
Mm.
The only reason we exist is because poverty exists, ultimately. But if poverty didn't exist, we wouldn't exist.
Yeah, it's a good remit to have.
Absolutely, absolutely. So let's work towards putting ourselves out of business.
Alhamdulillah. All right, last anecdote.
Anecdote. So come back to Shaykh Tawfique. So I met Shaykh Tawfique 20 years ago, right? When I was still a trustee of that charity. He came to Nottingham. He was still he was still a student at Medina University. I think he was in his final year. He came and did this wonderful talk in our local masjid about the passing of Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, right? And incredibly emotional. There was not a dry eye in the room. Anyway, afterwards, we invited him to one of the brothers' house, for dinner and all this sort of stuff. We introduced the charity that we were working on. We introduced that to him. Said, "Oh, look, Sheikh, this is what we're doing," all this sort of stuff, right? And he had a twinkle in his eye, a bit of a smile on his face. And he goes, "Who built your website?" And we said, we used these brothers in London, and they built our website for us. He said, "No." He said, "I built your website."
Oh, wow.
He said they subcontracted it out to me in Medina, and I built your website.
Wow.
And then I came along and replaced it.
So 20 years later, now you're working for him, effectively.
And now 20 years later,
you're working for him.
Yeah, 20 years later, now he's kind of my boss. MashaAllah.
This has been insightful, genuinely.
Good.
Because you and I have had a lot of conversations on the phone, but even I still learned a lot today.
Good.
It was an eye-opener for me.
Good.
You've actually renewed my faith in a lot of ways, because there's been a lot that's come out about charities, especially in the UK and the Muslim charity sector. But you've helped me understand the nuance of that conversation. And only you could have done it, because you've been in this sector for so long, you've been in this game for so long, and we've had conversations. So I couldn't do this. I couldn't explain the nuances to somebody else. So only you could have done that.
It is very nuanced. And nuanced is the right word. It's there is a lot to it. And although we are as a sector a collective, but every single organization works in different ways. Although it looks from the outside that we all do the same thing. Oh, you all provide food, and you all provide water and emergency relief, and etc., etc. But it's very nuanced. Every country that we work in, every community that we work in, has its own set of challenges, and you've got to navigate them in ways that are peculiar to that particular community or that particular country. And so it's really, so when we're devising our marketing and we kind of go out and we talk about, there's a lot of sloganeering, right? So for example, the 100% donation kind of sloganeering that happens, like, it's really problematic, because it holds the sector to one standard, and it's like, that's an impossible standard.
It kind of becomes everybody, it just establishes real estate in people's minds, and all people are looking for is 100% donation.
Absolutely.
And that becomes a metric by what everything is judged.
Absolutely.
And maybe that's not what maybe you should be judging by other things.
Absolutely. Like there's an irony that comes with that particular, just to stay with that point, there's an irony that comes with that. And I see this every day in the conversation that I have with donors, in that there is absolutely an expectation for us to take minimal admin. We talked about gift aid, etc. But then there's also an expectation that we should be providing the best services possible. So there should be staff that should be available to answer your queries over the phone or via email or via nowadays social media. Hey, if I send you a message on Facebook, why are you not responding? Hey, if I send you a DM on Instagram, why are you not responding? Well, that requires staff. That requires technology. That requires systems, right? For those messages to come into us and respond back out to you. Hey, you've not given me my report on that £10 donation that I made 6 months ago. Why not? Well, somebody has to produce that report. Somebody has to collect the data from the field. Somebody has to. That takes time. That takes somebody to pay somebody to do that. That takes skill, knowledge, somebody to be able to design a report, put the right information, and then send it to you, right? Now, that is cost. Now, how do you achieve that, but then have zero admin? So there's this kind of really...
What would you call it then? Instead of calling it 100% donation policy, what do you think it should we even be having that conversation? Should that be part of the branding and the marketing even?
I don't think it should be part of the conversation. I think it's unhelpful, if I'm honest with you. I think
what should be, what if you were to have a tagline for a charity to say, okay, this is, because ultimately if I as a donor, and what anybody else as a donor wants to know is can I trust this charity to do what they're doing, right? Is my money going to work as hard as it can inside this charity? Because everybody's going to have to choose, like, where am I going to put my money? What should that tagline then be?
Yeah, and I think ultimately that should be about value, right?
Yeah, but what can they say?
What value is that donation giving you? Are you wanting, and that's where things like transparency enter into the conversation, right? Transparency itself is a very subjective word, because transparency means something to me, different to me, than what it means to you, right? Like when I use the word transparency, it's evoking something in your mind, and it'll be evoking something in the minds of everybody that's watching this video, and that will be unique to them, right? And so it's not even the transparency bit for me. It's about the value. What value are you trying to derive from giving this donation? That's not,
and you can't put that in a tagline. That's
challenging because it comes down to motivations. For some people, they're motivated by the spiritual aspect of giving, right? So I'm only going to give in Ramadan because I'm going to get X reward. I'm only going to give on the 27th night because I'm going to get X reward. I'm only going to give on the odd nights in the last 10 days because I'm going to get X reward, and so on, right? And so how do you communicate value back to that individual? Then there's others that want to give to the homeland. I am from a diaspora community. I want to benefit my homeland. How do you communicate value to that individual? Then there's others that the cause is important.
Yeah. And they want to see the impact actually taking place. They want to see it in action.
Right. For some people, child sponsorship is important, for one reason or the next. And I see this all the time, we'll have sponsors that will come forward and they'll say, I have 2 boys. I've always wanted a daughter. I want to sponsor a girl. Just a simple example, but there's so many of those examples, right? For them, that's something very, very personal. How do you communicate value to that individual?
So the conversation is a lot more than 100% donation policy.
Absolutely.
So are you able, if somebody wants to sponsor a girl, are you as a charity, are you actually able to do that?
Yeah.
And does my contribution make a difference to that, to whatever it is that you're doing?
Makes a huge difference. In our case, we do HIF sponsorship at the moment.
Okay.
We will be providing, we're looking at providing child sponsorship, orphan sponsorship later, inshallah. But for now, it's HIF sponsorship. These are children that are boarding in these madrasas. They are receiving, Quranic education, and for them, as well as kind of your standard education, and for them, that's the only education that is available to them in that community. That's the only option that they have, and they will come out. They will graduate as a memorizer of Quran. They will have graduated, high school as well, or whatever it is, and now they actually have a real opportunity to go out and earn a living in a way that they just didn't have, or their parents didn't have. So that's where the impact is. That's where the impact is, right? And so, so our HIF sponsorship is about sponsoring the meals that they receive while they're at the boarding school, right? Whatever it is, 2 to 3 meals a day. And that's keeping them going. That's keeping them there. The meals are like I said to you earlier on, the meals are keeping them there. And if they're there, they learn. And if they learn, they become educated.
Okay. But if you were to summarize, and just to finish this off as well now, if you were to say a summary of me as a donor, what could I look for in a charity to feel like this is the where, apart from choosing the cause, whether I want to send the money home or if I want to, just looking at the charity in itself, what could I be looking for in the charity to know, okay, this is a charity that I can trust that it's going to do the job well?
It really starts from the motivation. Why are you giving in the first place?
Okay.
Right? And really connect with why you're giving in the first place.
Okay.
Because it doesn't start with which charity should I support. It starts with why am I giving?
Okay.
Right. And once you understand why it is that you're giving, then the decision of who to support becomes a lot more easy. And then
But if you've got a short list of charities in that, let's say there's a particular cause that I'm after, and I shortlist it down to 2 or 3 charities, these are the ones that I want to give it to. I've understood what my why is, and these are the ones that I want to give it to. How do I then differentiate? Between those 3 charities, how do I know?
So how well are they communicating their impact?
Okay.
Right. How focused are they?
Okay.
Right. Are they providing? And look, let's be realistic, right? There's, if your motivation is to provide a long-term impact, then you've got to go with a charity that is has a long-term objective.
Okay.
But if your motivation is to, I've got 50 quid and I just want to give it right now, and that's the end of it, then that's you maybe a charity that is focused on emergency relief, that's going to take you £50 and provide a food pack that's going to last for a month, is more applicable to you, is more appropriate for you, right? But like I said, that's why it's got to start from you. It's not about the charities, it's about you and what your motivation is, and then you align with that. And I think a lot of people see it the other way around. And I think
I was just going to say, because we're so used to being bombarded with, can you donate to us?
Sure.
We've kind of gotten to the point where, well, everybody's going to ask me for my money and I'm just going to give it.
Yeah.
To, okay, well, what do I want to do with my money? And then go and, just turn that up on its head, basically.
Absolutely. Right. And
again, I think that's driven by guilt again, because we're all guilted into donating. We were going to donate anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. Many look, and it is also about taking some responsibility in this transaction, right? And I'm seeing that more and more, and it's something that is very, very welcome. There was 20 years ago, people of my generation, let's just say, that were giving without asking any questions. Here's my zakat, and you use it how you want to use it, right?
Although there's a certain beauty to that, I have to say.
Yeah, but it doesn't absolve you of the responsibility.
Okay.
Right?
Fine.
Because it's still your zakat that you're having to give, right?
Okay.
It's still your sadaqah that you're having to give.
Yeah.
So it doesn't absolve you of the responsibility, right? The question, Allah's still going to ask you the question, right? And so what did you do with the resources that I gave you? What did you do with them? Well, I just gave them to that charity and then I forgot about it, and it doesn't work. Right. So that's why, we have to, as donors, we have to take responsibility in this transaction.
Are you saying there's not enough responsibility that we're taking as donors? We say that we need
It's increasing.
It's increasing.
Okay. And I've seen it increase. And, we get asked questions all the time, and it's welcome. It's very, very welcome. Right.
And if a charity is not answering those questions, that's problematic.
Yeah, absolutely. Or doesn't have, or
is not capable.
Or is not even able to explain the concepts to you, because like I say, for every charity will be different, right? There are 100% charities out there and they are making it work. So there's charities, for example, that have trading subsidiaries, right? And all of their operating cost is coming from the revenue, the profit that's being made from that company that they are.
I remember I've spoken to a couple of charities and we've had the conversation with them, and they've been, one of them's been able to answer the question very well. and that's been very satisfying. It's been reassuring. And then there's a charity that I was going to donate to this Ramadan. It was a local one, and they said we're just not set up to be able to make use of your funds in the way that you want.
Yeah.
Which that was still good.
Yeah.
Because I was like, it was good because I thought, okay, well, when I want to donate for the cause that you're working on, I definitely will, because you've given me an honest and sincere
Absolutely.
answer.
That's absolutely a charity that you should support.
Yeah, definitely. It was a very local one.
Because they are, that communicates to me that they are entirely about driven by their cause,
There's integrity there.
their mission.
Yeah, and there's integrity there.
And that mission focus is very, very important. But like I say, not every charity's mission is going to align with your motivations. That's why you have to
look
connect.
So ultimately, what you're saying is look for alignment. You and the charity should be aligned together. You as a donor and the charity as a fundraiser, as a charity, you should be aligned together. Basically, that's what's going to work.
Yeah, and the only way that you can be aligned is by you knowing what your motivation is in the first place. Why are you giving? Right? And once you've cracked that, then the rest is really, really straightforward. It drives your questioning, it drives your conversation. So going back to what I was saying about there is increased awareness now over the last 20 years, right? But it's not enough. And it's not enough because we're still quite naive in the questions that we're asking. Like just even this conversation about 100% donation, like it's some people are making it work, but then to have this expectation that the whole charity sector should be operating without taking anything for admin is naive. Well, how do then organizations run? How do they attract the best talent? How do they provide you with the best services? How do they answer your questions when you want them to answer your questions, right? And so on and so forth. All of that requires resource, and that resource requires budget to be able to fund that resource.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you.
Thank you. This was really, really, really useful.
No, this was a lot more insight. Wow, how is it useful for you?
It just gave me a bit of a platform to be able to air some of these things, and
I think you're just being polite. You're just being polite for the video, because as soon as these cameras go off, you'll be like, "Who are you?"
Not at all, man. Not at all. No, it's been really, really good. Alhamdulillah.
All right. Alhamdulillah. Okay, let's end it there.
All right.
Let's have a handshake.
Thank you very much.
Kiss in your hand.
All right.
Shaykh,
All
Deputy CEO. All right. If you have any questions about the content or the subject matter, the things that I've discussed in this video, then please sign up to my Discord. The link is in the description below. It's a small app that you can use, very similar to how chat groups used to work before. You can be anywhere in the world and sign up for it. All you have to do is sign up via Patreon, which will then give you access to the Discord app. It is a like-minded community of other people that are talking about the same things, where we can just speak openly to each other. You might have some questions of your own, or you might have some insight of your own. Come and talk to me, come and talk to others. We can share ideas with each other, and we can grow as a community.